This is week 11, R511, and we're recording to the cloud. Thanks to Michelle and Jennifer for showing up early, along with Christian, my wonderful AI instructional assistant, associate instructor. AI in education. We don't need AI in education. We have Christian with us. 5 more weeks, and he's going to say no to all my requests from here on. So let me give a brief overview of what we're going to do during the next few weeks. Today, we're going to hear about knowledge management in class. Today, I'll talk about a book chapter that I wrote with 2 former students a decade ago, a little over that, in fact. I'm going to summarize that article for you. It's a very deep article in some ways. It's very complex. And I'll try and give you the overview. It's in your packet of articles. It's with my former student, Jingli Chang, who's often a guest in this class, along with Sujin Sun from Korea. And then we're here from John Graves, who was my first doctoral student, who actually completed his dissertation. Not my first doctoral student. He's the first one who completed his. My first doctoral student took 14 years to complete his. So we won't talk about the guy who decided to go work for Southwest Airlines after 14 years and fly in planes. And that he did, and that he does. So week 12 is next week, and we're not going to meet on Monday. We're going to meet on Tuesday, but it's gotten complicated now. My former student in Cyprus is in a experience center, a learning experience center, and she's in charge. She got promoted, and after getting her PhD at IU, she got an MBA on top of it in Cyprus somewhere. Her name is Maria Salamou. But because the clocks changed in Cyprus after the US, the 6-hour difference is now an extra hour in Cyprus. And I had told everyone to show up. She'll be here at 1 o'clock on Tuesday. But she thinks she's showing up at noon because the clocks are different. So we have to sort out the exact time. I'm going to set an update, but it'll be on the Tuesday. And the hour before she comes in, I'm going to lecture, either finish the current one I'm on for knowledge management, or move on to self-efficacy and Albert Bandura's research on social cognitive theory and self-efficacy and what it means to be self-efficacious, and vicarious learning and all sorts of things that Bandura talked about. So Maria will be with us on April 4th on a Tuesday, and she can't make Monday. And it's too late at night. It's because of the hour differential in Cyprus from here to Cyprus. So we're meeting in the afternoon, but I'm trying to do a noon time so people can duck out during lunchtime, maybe, sort of. On the following week, we have a person who got her master's in IST. I've had it as a guest before. Her name is Daria Vaughn, and Daria is in Indianapolis and was doing instructional design, but no longer is more in charge of, well, she was a chief learning officer involved in change management, like John Graves is tonight, and doing all sorts of corporate training related projects. And she's agreed to come in on Monday, April 10th, I think at 7 o'clock. So we'll hear from Daria. And the following week after that, on the 17th, either we're going to have me as a guest, nobody as a guest, or my friend, a former an alum, Jesse Yee, who is at Box as a vice president in London. So I haven't approached her. Well, I did approach her. I just said the timing is different. She can't come again at night because of being in the UK. Probably would be on the weekend when she has time. And she's a brilliant person, worked for Motorola, worked for Vodafone, worked for many other companies, Genesis and others, and lives near Stonehenge. I got to see Stonehenge when visiting her last. So that's the assembly of things. In week 15, it says present final project. It doesn't mean your final projects are due on that date. It means that's when you optionally can present final projects. I may have put points in for doing that, but last year I did have some points in it, but nobody got any points because I don't know if anyone did present their final project. So I deleted the points involved. It's just to honor. It says final projects and reflection, 50 points due April 3rd with a 5-day grace. So you have an option of presenting them on the last day, on April 24th. Does that make sense, Michelle or Jennifer? Okay, any questions, Michelle or Jennifer? Let me go into my slides then on knowledge management. And again, I'll have to find them. And those are not the slides we want to do. Those are my student who's going to dissertate tomorrow. That's her slides. One of my students is going to finish tomorrow. Here we go. Okay. Christian, can you see the slides? Thumbs up? Right, great. Well,
Yes,
that's
sorry.
that's Hong Kong. If you haven't been to Hong Kong, that's my former student, Jingli Cheng, who's worked for the Federal Reserve. He's worked for Adobe, Macromedia, Hewlett Packard, Walmart, MasterCard or Visa in New York, University of Hong Kong, when I visited him there. And now he's in a law firm in New York. He's been all over the board. He's got some real interesting experiences to share when I do bring him in. I don't want to bring him every time, so I'm giving him the semester off, but I'll probably bring him next time. Smart, no, he's a brilliant guy, Jingli is, and I helped him get several of those jobs. He also worked for Stanford Business School, and I may have missed a couple more of them along the way. He's very good at getting jobs, very good. And there's just this is at the end of the climb. This is at the very end of the climb. You basically are at ground zero down below, and you got to walk all the way up a mountain to get to, and then over. And once you get to the mountain, you have to take another, what do you call it? An express elevator. It's not an elevator. It's one of those lifts, on the side of a mountain. So it's this high up, and Hong Kong is a very interesting place. I mean, it's not just one one small little place. There's like 50, no, maybe more than 50, maybe hundreds of islands that is Hong Kong. We also got to Macau, and then from there we went to Shenzhen, China, which is just over the border into mainland China. And so, yeah, that's when we got over the border into mainland. He got me to the other side, and then he left me. So you see the suitcases behind with some people, everyone's getting off the express train going from Hong Kong to Shenzhen. Shenzhen's the size of Chicago, and it didn't exist like 50 years ago, okay? Basically, the whole city up in the past 30 years, and it's like 15 million or more people. So it's craziness. It's the one place in China where I did get some internet going. I think maybe through Hong Kong, I'm not sure, but you had to use VPN. Otherwise, I gave 18 or 19 talks at 12 universities in 6 cities in 4 weeks, something like that. So Jingli says, let's write a book chapter for a project. There's a call for papers that a friend of mine had sent. 3 people, in fact, one in the UK, who's a good friend of mine, one in Australia, and I forget where the third one's from. And so we decided to do this book chapter, and I'm summarizing it for you. It's basically an overview of the changes involved in knowledge management. And I'm going to hide my video panel. So if you're making faces at me, I will not be able to see them. And so as a former accountant, I can verify that the first statement is expressly true in that, well, actually, when I was trained to be an accountant, people didn't really think too much about accounting for knowledge as an intangible asset. Over time, though, corporations started seeing knowledge and innovation as extremely important to their bottom line. And so they tried to find ways to account for that, to put it on their ledgers, if you will. But over time, people have critiqued that approach, the resource approach to knowledge. And so, yeah, we can try to look at a knowledge organization or a learning organization and what that means. But people tried to look at knowledge management as being the foundation for a company's existence, in effect, that companies wouldn't survive if they didn't innovate, right? They didn't create, they didn't design, and if they didn't have creative people. And so how do we take inventory, take stock of those people, their ideas, their inventions, their patents, and so forth? A knowledge-based view of a company, of a firm, is deeply rooted in a resource view, which looks at a company as a collection of resources utilized to achieve bottom line, to get to their goals. Okay. It argues that what gives a firm its competitive advantages are the types of resources that are rare, durable, valuable kinds of things. And that's what we want to foster in a company. We want to have, a strong underbelly for the firm, for the company, for the organization, institution, so it has, viability over a long period of time. And so it's not just documents and manuals and procedures and videos and databases and memos and other records that one might have. That's explicit knowledge. What we want to try foster is that tacit kinds of things, ideas, inventions, insights, cultural beliefs and values. So according to research view of a company, knowledge, especially tacit knowledge, is an intangible form of a resource that companies, try to generate to get competitive advantage over other companies. Okay, we want to keep our employees who are inventive, who push us into the next phase of our, growth cycle. So within the boundaries of a firm, the conversion of tacit knowledge into explicit forms of knowledge and the sharing of that knowledge is seen as essential. So we want to turn that tacit knowledge, our thinking, our experiences, our competencies into things, in effect. And so we have as an accountant, we have our cash on hand, we have our inventory, and our, fixed assets, our furniture, our physical plant, buildings and properties that we might own, equipment and, technologies of some sorts. Intangible, which is harder to account for and harder to put on the books somewhere, is our goodwill that we might have with our customers or potential customers, our copyrights that we own, our patents that we own, our software applications, web apps and so forth, our trademarks that make us different and distinct from others in the field. So, intangible assets are an important organizational assets. And so somehow we have to get them on the books according to this resource view, okay? And so knowledge from this standpoint is viewed as a transferable commodity. The focus on management must be on the production, acquisition, management, retention, and application of knowledge, and capturing what we own, what we have in terms of our knowledge base, our stores. And so Intel, back 15, 20 years ago, we're trying to capture it all through wikis and having employees, as they retire, put their documents up, everything that they've designed or did over their time as an employee there, into a gigantic database. And IBM did that too, and many companies followed suit. And so to try and store those in document form so that the next wave of employees could utilize that and take advantage of that knowledge resource, if you will. So at the quote down there, knowledge, everyone has transferable commodity knowledge. Sharing your unique expertise in introductions for someone else creates a archive, creates a legacy, a lasting legacy. So these artifacts that we could produce. A different perspective views knowledge as a process, not a resource. Okay. And so it's something that we're constantly generating, constantly evaluating, and taking stock of. This view sees knowledge in the context of organizations and holds that individual learning must always be considered in the context of the processes of the social entity that relies on that individual. So this is Spender, 1996. This is his definition of what individual learning is, or how it must be viewed, in effect. The organization's primary role is to integrate and apply knowledge in the production of goods and services. Okay, I pretty much everyone can agree with that. So folks like Nanaka and other people, Libeskind, Liebner, Levy and Liebner, all trying to come up with ways in which to understand knowledge from a process point of view, and to think about how we can convert things from a tacit format, something that's tip of the tongue knowledge that we know we have, it's part of what we do, it's our competencies, our skills, and who we are, into more explicit, something that can be detached from the individual and communicated with others, and become a tool, if you will, knowledge as a tool that can help the company survive, and not only survive, but thrive and push forward into the next iteration of who they are meant to be. So there's been a shift from a resource view, and even before that, we had a shift from not even accounting for it at all to having, knowledge management be something of a resource, and we take stock of, we inventory for our assets and liability statements, our balance sheet, if you will, of the company. And now we look at it more as a process that we can better understand, so as to provide the ingredients to foster additional knowledge within the company and the sharing of that knowledge. And I'll also point out at the end of this talk, the technologies like social media, which, whether it's TikTok or Instagram or WeChat or Kakao Talk or Line or Facebook or say Instagram and Twitter and all these other tools that are out in front of us, have emerged in the past couple of decades to provide what a lot of these knowledge management people have been talking about. It's the social cultural communities. It's the community practice that is extremely important. The system of knowing, the firm is viewed as a system of knowing activity rather than as a system of applied abstract knowledge. As I said, a lot of this stuff is pretty dense. Okay. So the shift of knowledge from being an object to a process of integration and application has a lot of implications for what management's going to do, what leadership means. Okay, so knowledge is not just an object that we can capture, store, and protect and put on our balance sheet somewhere, or our alternative balance sheet. It's rather the emphasis shifts to viewing the firm as an activity system, if you will, an entire system that fosters to the new knowledge and provides a context to integrate one's knowledge bases and then apply what one has learned. So it's from the standpoint of the chapter we wrote, it becomes critical to differentiate between a knowledge-based view and a resource-based view. Okay, so the traditional focus looked at knowledge as an object. We've moved to knowledge as a process. Okay, I've already said that a couple of times. So the focus on process, on ways of knowing, this is kind of front and center when we think about, 21st century companies out there and what we hear, the Googles of the world, the Facebooks of the world, the Teslas of the world, and all these e-car companies, e-vehicle companies that are emerging, I'm sure are moving from a centralized control to more decentralized understanding of knowledge and more distributed knowledge existing throughout the company. So Jennifer Park, who defended her dissertation a year ago, looked at the flattened out hierarchies within large Korean conglomerates, in particular car companies. And she looked at how the flattening of the hierarchies, and not just calling people sir or by their last names, can foster additional kind of identity and knowledge generation and idea generation within the company. The informal processes that are occurring, instead of being very formulaic and having to follow particular rules, opening those things up enables employees to feel more valued and feel as though their ideas matter and that they can make a contribution to the company. So in the primary thing that we have to look at when we start to understand concepts like knowledge management is not capturing and storing knowledge, but facilitating, generating, applying, and transferring that knowledge. Storing does happen, right? Capturing does happen, but that's not where the primary focus is. So we've evolved in the area of knowledge management to some degree in the IST field. Jingli Chang and myself and Su Jing we wrote the chapter because we felt the IST field needs to be aware of that if we're going to get into human performance technologies and human resource development. Knowledge management is a key part of that. And so seeing knowledge as an asset underlies that capturing of knowledge, as I said, but all employees are part of a larger community. And what we have to do is create communities of practice where there's sharing, where there's idea generation, and where people contribute new ideas. So in the past, we had computer-based systems that would track and store and index large amounts of information and try to save and archive those huge swaths of information out there. Okay. Trying to overcome issues of it's very costly to do that, but with technology, we can better or more efficiently record and index and categorize those knowledge bases that are out there. And so technology-based management systems in the past were aimed at that collection and dissemination of knowledge, but often, even though companies wanted to do this, employees were very unwilling to do it. They weren't really motivated to do it. They weren't incentivized to do it, even in the old system, the old way, So the platforms that were created by IBM, by Intel, and by other companies, Microsoft, by other companies in the past, were not fully utilized. There are a couple of reasons for that. Two primary ones were that it's hard to represent the employee's knowledge in text and image and sound and video in any kind of format. It's really hard to represent what knowledge means and what it is. And the second is, once you start doing that, the information bases that are available to try and index, to try and capture and maintain, are either too vast and overwhelming to try and do, or too little, and cause there is too little made available. Either the employees balk at doing it, or the company itself hasn't captured enough of it. So there's a couple of issues there in trying to define what knowledge is and trying to capture what knowledge is. But there's been a failure in companies in not recognizing that they need to move another step beyond this, as I mentioned earlier, beyond capturing, storing, and retrieving of that knowledge, into looking at not just knowledge objects out there, and that we can catalog and share with one another, but knowledge systems, knowledge activities, in effect. As I said, there's a huge focus on turning our tacit knowledge or intuitive knowledge, knowing how to do something, into more explicit types of knowledge. Some things that are hard to communicate, hard to share with one another, and hard to record on the books, But the Nanaka from Japan has been one of the foremost proponents of this new age of knowledge management, to try and take our internal intuitive knowledge and explicate it. And so he has a model. I'm not going to go through his model, but there are 4 key parts of it: internalizing new knowledge, externalizing that knowledge, and combining different strands of knowledge together. The 4th is socializing, to create opportunities to generate, share, sense, empathize with others, and hopefully transfer that knowledge. So this is his model, in effect. I am not a Nanaka expert or a knowledge management expert, so I will just leave you with, it's complex, but what you're trying to do is look at the system here to try and get employees to articulate their knowledge base, to try and have them understand what it is that they know and don't know, so that they can help the next wave of employees in the organization. That's one part of it. Explicating our tacit knowledge through articulation, through dialogue, through storytelling, through cases, through scenarios. but then socializing with other people and learning their stories and their understandings and their new ideas and so forth. Perhaps it's going to happen at a water cooler, if you will. But organizations face a challenge, as I said, and some employees like Christian, they're going to be blowing bubbles and don't really care about the knowledge management processes of the company. So it becomes difficult to create these knowledge repositories, let alone use them if they do exist, because employees' resistance and challenges and not incentivizing them or not giving the purpose or meaning behind it. But there's been a cultural change. And that's been happening over the last couple decades. As we've moved into this 21st century and finding multiple ways in which to record and share our diverse knowledge sets, and companies have started to see diversity as extremely important, and capturing the diversity is critical to the creative generation of new ideas and innovations within the corporate setting. And moving beyond maybe the company itself to the vendors and customers, to have them be part of that cultural change in knowledge management within the company. Increasingly, companies are looking outside themselves for the knowledge management possibilities and opportunities that exist. Customers can be a wealth of knowledge and resources in terms of the cycle of innovation for the company, looking at how they're using products and why they're using them and why they're disbanded and so forth is extremely critical. And being cognizant of time here, I'm only at 7:30. John will be with us in a half hour, doing pretty good so far. So maybe I should just say, are there any questions so far or comments?
You're talking a lot about generation of new knowledge and innovation, but I don't think I heard anything about mentorship or preserving, handing down knowledge so that it's not lost when employees leave.
So that's part of the model that exists here, is even the two-tiered mentoring process, to find an organization that can create a mentoring program and then have mentors that might be prior employees. In the case where we're working in the military, we had retired generals mentoring the new recruits and so forth. That's not in this particular article, but it's kind of implied throughout all of this mentoring program. It's not the focus here, but that has to be part of the system that's included. It can't just be technology-based show and tells. It's got to be, there's got to be a human in the loop somewhere, and that best is going to happen with a mentor related to the occupation that you have, and whether it's an external mentor or internal mentor. And companies have arisen over the last 2 decades that provide the mentoring services. And I'm thinking of a company out of Denver. It was something like Third Wave, but it's the third, blah, blah, blah. Could look up third, I can't think of the second word in this, and say Denver and look at mentoring programs. I know, Christian, there's 2 more words after third, and I can't think of the next 2 words, but Third River, maybe Third River Corporation. Try Third River and see if that comes through. But there are others out there too. Nothing so far, Christian? Okay, I'll let you keep looking. I'll go back to the slides here. So conversation, storytelling becomes critical within this new process approach to knowledge management. Conversing with mentors, if you will. Discussing with other people who are in similar positions with you. So there's a well-known study by Orr in 1990, 32 years ago, looked at how photocopier technicians use storytelling as a way to learn from one another. Instead of just relying on their manuals or exclusively relying on manuals and other forms of employee support, they rely on the stories of others that they casually learn from as they converse. And the same thing happens within a mentoring program. And in the past, we've not relied enough on the nuances that we learned from that storytelling kind of approach, the narratives that give us much richer, ingrained knowledge that has been built and accumulated over time. So narrative becomes a useful way for knowledge transfer across different organizational boundaries, across countries. If it's a global and international company, it might be operating in multiple places, the use of narrative there, as well as the use of narrative for new employees. It helps build up the collective expertise of the organization, but it's one factor, it's one possibility to create a collective whole within the organization to say, who are we? So this view, this understanding of knowledge management is aligned with not a behavioral approach, not as I said, a cognitive approach, but more of a social constructivistic approach, in that they see that knowledge is highly subjective and contextualized in nature. Instead of trying to wrap our arms around each knowledge nugget of an employee and getting them to record it and index it, we want to foster the creation, transfer, and exchange of knowledge, as well as the impact and application of it. So we have to consider the social cultural context of the organization and the employees that work within that organization. And so knowledge is a complex and constantly dynamic or changing entity. And it is extremely complicated and difficult to codify, store, and transfer. So my accounting friends who are trying to do that, most of them have probably given up doing that, but instead we focus on not accounting for that knowledge, but fostering or creating the elements or the principles or the features of a community of practice, effective community of practice, successful community of practice, so that knowledge can be generated and it can have an impact on that organization or institution. So it not just be a company, but higher ed institution as well. So we have to focus on the manner of supporting that knowledge management. Otherwise, we'll constrain it and it'll be kind of limited. So knowledge as a process view. And knowledge as a process view gets us into the context, and that context might include the emerging technologies that are wrapping around all of us today, and there are hundreds of them. Some organizations rely on Slack, and that becomes the cusp of everything that the company does, and that becomes the community of practice within that organization and that knowledge management structure. So in our chapter, we point out that there's three basic premises then to this notion. Knowledge is a process, a social process. Knowledge management should be focused on supporting the creation, transfer, and exchange of and application of knowledge, not just capturing it. And communication technologies and conversations that we have are ways to foster that. So our knowledge management technologies are extremely important. And so today we move to thinking about creating a community of practice in and amongst others, a COP, if you will. In higher ed, we have communities of learners, a COL. But in organizations, in the real world, higher ed's not the real world, it never has been. So folks like Brown, Collins, and DeGood, John Seeley Brown, Paul DeGood, and Alan Collins have worked together on something called situated cognition back in 1988, 89, which you read in week 6, and Lave and Wenger, which you read in week 6 as well. Jean Lave and Etienne Wenger. Etienne had interviewed for a job in IST, as I mentioned, maybe 15 years ago. He interviewed about 2005 or so, 2004, but his wife didn't want to move from New Zealand. We couldn't figure out why that is, to Indiana. But lo and behold, they didn't. He's become a really famous guy, and he's created a notion of community practice with legitimate peripheral participants, novices on the outside, on the periphery, observing what experts do on the inside, and gradually becoming more expert-like as a journeyman along that journey, along that pathway within an organization. So COPs are an activity system about which participants share understandings concerning what they are doing and what it means in their lives and for the community. So situated learning construct helps us understand that we need to look at that activity plane. We need to look at the novices on the periphery and how they're mentored, Jennifer, how they're mentored to move towards becoming more full participants or accepted members of that community. So mentorship again becomes important, although we didn't explicate it here. So in Wanger's view, we have this community that we belong to. We can give to that community. We can learn from that community. We can get something from that community. We can get identity and gradually this notion of becoming a member, a full-fledged member within the community. And those of you in graduate school, which all of you are, become a member of academia. You might be observing from the outside and maybe gradually becoming an accepted participant within that community of practice. So you want to get people involved in hands-on doing with experiences so that they might get involved by reviewing papers for a conference, maybe 1 or 2 papers, not writing papers that conference, not delivering papers, but they review a couple, or they read a couple, or they attend sessions at a conference and they talk to other people who attend sessions. Then they go to the socials and the water coolers and the sodas and the waters and the beer conversations, and they learn from others, gain meaning, and they get identity of who they could be within the community over time, and get a sense of belonging within that community. So there's some shared stories at those AECT and AERA and other conference socials. They might share links, they might share web apps, they might discuss things. There's this shared repertoire. There also is mutual knowledge that percolates over time through the relationships that one has on joint projects or initiatives or inventions, papers that one might write, white papers and so forth. There's this joint enterprise too, where we negotiate with others within the community of practice. We gain intersubjectivity within and among other members by knowing how they might respond to a particular initiative or announcement or pronouncement from the higher up echelon within the organization. So these are things that Wanger found to be true of communities, that we engage in diverse conversations with others within our community, and we share our knowledge, and over time it becomes mutual knowledge, I guess, if you will. We create new artifacts, whether it's a list of questions that Christian came up with for John Graves later. That's an artifact that we can utilize within this class here tonight. We can share what different concepts mean. By the way, Christian, did you ever find the name of the company? Was it Three River or something?
So I found 2 different companies that have name River in it. They're mentorship companies. There could be more out there, but one was in Indiana, actually, Westfield, Indiana, and the other was in Ohio.
What are the names?
But one is named Third River.
Yep.
That's the one that is in Indiana.
Oh, that used to be in Denver.
Okay.
They must have moved. You can look up the history, if you will, in Wikipedia and let me know if I'm right.
So and then the other is Riversoft.
Is River what?
Riversoft. River Software. Sorry, River Software.
River Software. Yeah. So I had the river right, and I do remember that one too. Yeah, River Software. Okay, look up the Wikipedia page for each of them and see if they go to the about and see if they have a history and see which one comes from Denver.
Yeah.
So around 20, 30 years ago, this movement towards community practice was really strong. And I used to teach a course on the social context of learning that I'm no longer allowed to teach because I moved to IST, but it's my class. And in there, we read from John Seeley Brown, The Social Life of Information. and fascinating book, and many books on the social context of learning and so forth. And he or they talked about that Xerox copy machine study from Orr back in 1990, how you gain knowledge from your casual conversations, the informal things. It's not just the formalistic learning that happens, it's the informal ways. In fact, my friend Jay Cross, who passed away 5 years ago, he said we learn most things informally. 80–90% of what we do, we get from an informal or informal settings. It's not, the formal is only like 20%, if that, and it decreases over time as we get older. The informal is increasing, and so it's a huge interest of mine to study that. So the water cooler knowledge and the stories that one might partake in when that happens. That's why Steve Jobs, when he designed the new facility for Apple, the circular spaceship that they had, he put the bathrooms in certain places and the meeting halls, and a lot of companies, in fact, don't have don't have office. They just have everyone in a flat cubicle spaces, so people are forced to share with one another. But there's research on that too that that shows that that's not necessarily the most effective way. But Steve Jobs was constantly thinking about the way in which knowledge could be shared and generated within the corporate setting. And Christian, you can look up that too. What is the building called? The new Apple headquarters? Do they have a name for it? I'm just curious. So there's, again, knowledge sharing happening. So we have our training manuals, our org charts, and conventional kinds of things and job descriptions, but we need to redesign and rethink the organizations, in terms of, the work settings that people are in. So, work just doesn't happen in producing training manuals. It comes in the conversations that we have with one another jointly within our communities of practice. And then
think Apple Park.
Apple Park. Thank you very much. Yeah. Did you find the other one? Which one comes from Denver?
Still looking.
Okay. Thank you, Christian. So Wenger, continually pointed out that these communities of practice are not just happening at Xerox Palo, in Xerox Palo Alto Research Park or among copy machine people. They happen in insurance agencies and among healthcare organizations and all sorts of things that members of the communities have their mutual knowledge. They have their sense of identity for that particular entity that they've joined. They have the tools and the routines that they go through to try and solve problems, and the tools they use to share new ideas with and among one another. And so Wenger said communities of practices are groups of people who share a common concern, who have a set of problems, who have passion about topics, and then they try to solve the problems or challenges that are placed in front of them. Communities of practice include, a main concept of communities of practice is this notion of knowledge sharing and solving problems and creating, artifacts and repositories and so forth. I've mentioned this earlier. But it's not just the artifacts that are created and stored, as I said 5 times already. We're thinking about how to create a environment. I guess that last semester, if you had R622 with me, designing new learning environments, this really goes hand in hand. In fact, we had a week on communities of practice or learning communities in that course. And so what are the components? What are the features of an effective, successful online community of practice? And Liedtke points out or argues that communities of practice metaphor, kind of moves us up to meta capabilities. He said we have to also think about things like collaboration and leadership and quality management and participatory leadership. There are all these meta capabilities within that. So this gets us up into another range of thinking, if you will. Lesser and Stork argue that communities of practice contribute to organizational performance by way of providing social capital that leads to performance outcomes, new employee learning curves, faster learning curves, orientation sessions. We're speeding things up so that employees can function, can onboard more quickly within that organization, and respond to customer needs, can respond to vendor needs, and reduce the time that we have to redo things and rework things. So we have to reinvent the wheel. So community of practice can help speed things up, can help respond quicker and more effectively to our employees, to our customers, to our vendors, all that. So in our article next, we talk about organizations should continue to explore communities of practice as an approach to both organizational learning and organizational knowledge management. So COP kind of has a bigger, broader meaning in effect. It has to do with the whole entire organization, how it functions and survives, as well as the smaller subgroups of community within departments or units, or however we want to look at them. But again, we have to look at the social side rather than trying to imitate, what we see our competitors might be doing. Several researchers have insisted that significant amount of intense social interaction is critical to intensely interact and construct knowledge with others to get us to move from tacit knowledge to explicit knowledge. And those communities of practice, that sharing that takes place, might help us in that regard, to help the knowledge become more relevant to others and not just to ourselves. The networks that we build in and amongst others, beyond our strong ties to our weak ties, to people we might not normally meet, we're tied in LinkedIn. Well, LinkedIn is one tool that we can use then to get to our second, what do they call those things where we have a direct connection or a second Christian, what's that called? Second relationship or second connection or third or whatever?
Yeah, distant, really, I don't know. Yeah.
The Kevin Bacon approach. We're all connected to Kevin Bacon by 6 degrees of influence.
Two degrees of separation.
Yeah, separation or influence.
And so speaking of influence, it is the river company that used to be called Triple Creek.
Yeah.
Which is the one that was out in Denver. And so now they are called River and located in Columbus, Ohio.
Yeah, okay. So Triple Creek Mentoring. There you go, Jennifer. You can read up on Triple Creek Mentoring, and now it's Triple Mentor and River? Triple
It's
River?
just called River.
Just called River.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so you're kind of far down there in Dallas, Jennifer, but if you were close by, you could take a river raft down, Mississippi or Ohio, I guess, over there. So this fosters a focus on weak ties and the importance that we get from our, the information we can get from our weak ties. And a lot of job openings become available, not from the people who know well, but from person that knows someone who knows someone else who knows someone else, right? So knowledge management is increasingly putting a focus on the connections to one another. And those connections are fostered through the technologies. That social aspect can happen through the sharing and the communicative technologies. And the web is shifting from a vehicle that's just primarily transmitting knowledge in the early days, 1992, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97. We got to 2002, all of a sudden wikis emerged, and then podcasts emerged, and then blogs emerged. And now the web became a tool for participating, for sharing, for communicating. It's called the Web 2.0 initially, but my friend Stephen Downs said we no longer need to use the Web 2.0, but it shifted from transmitting knowledge to creating, sharing, and contributing knowledge. And we have these social softwares that provide support for conversations and our feedback on our work and our connections into new networks, whether they're blogs or RSS feeds or social tagging or multimedia. There are technologies wrapped all around us today, right? And we're looking at 7 minutes till we get to John here. So, we have to start understanding those social interactions that technology does foster, the knowledge creation that is possible, and create a more comprehensive view of the learning environments of which emerging technology is a key part of. And I'll let you read some of these definitions. I'm getting near the end here. Oh, right. Okay. So knowledge management is had a long interconnection with technologies as information and communication technologies continue to provide capabilities to meet new knowledge management needs. So technology is not the only thing. I guess that's the last quote. So final ending, we went to Macau. Jingli and I went to Macau, and we went to the old Portuguese portion of Macau, the old downtown in Macau, which was kind of neat. Back in 2015 in June, near the it might have been the beginning of June. It's the first part of my trip. So around June 7th, I would guess, or 5th. Yeah, around June 5th to 7th in Macau, 2015. And that's his little kid. No longer, we're talking 8 years later, nearly. He's probably grown up a little bit. And Timothy Hughes sitting next to me is one of the most prolific IST alums. And Teresa sitting next to him is master's student in language ed back from 20 years ago. The two of them got their degrees at IU about 15 to 20 years ago. There's Jingli. So that is, I thought it would take me 2 weeks to go through my little spiel. We've lost someone along the way. We didn't gain people. So hopefully we'll get some people when John arrives here. Thanks for the link, Christian. I appreciate you looking all this stuff up. And the River Company, not Triple Creek Mentoring, but the Little River, like the Little River Band. Jennifer, comment.
I guess I was just thinking about the mentoring from my previous perspective as a teacher, when teachers would walk out the door and, we might have a written curriculum, but there's a big difference between, getting the class up and running as a rookie teacher when, they could be paired up. And then later, once I was further into my career, then we had more formal programs, but it was sort of sink or swim at the beginning.
It was sink or swim. When I started as a faculty member 34 years ago, I went to see the AIs, the grad students, about the teaching. I didn't talk to I didn't talk to one faculty member. He didn't teach me much, but the grad students, they told me a whole heck of a lot of what I could be doing and so forth. The same is true as a grad student helping on a class. I talked to one other grad student and got some advice. I'm sure I've talked to multiple. Any last comments?
It kind of reminds me of the if you get run over by a bus folder that we'd have in some of my positions. That essentially you were in charge of certain systems. I was a systems administrator at one point, and you were in charge of certain systems. And if they always wanted to have backup information about your system, so if you got hit by a bus, sorry, John, we just, hi. We were talking about if you get hit by a bus, backup knowledge store folder that happens in IT worlds. Maybe I'm sure they happen elsewhere, but
Redundancy, so that not just one person has it.
So John, I've been lecturing for an hour about knowledge management, and I'll have to send you the book chapter I wrote on knowledge management. It's back from 2010. I did put this in Dropbox for everybody, the slides. I did put the article in Dropbox as well, both with next to the slides. So if you look under week 11, so it is week 11. John, you want to say hi real quick?
Hey guys, I'm John Graves.
That's all I wanted, because now I'm going to stop the recording from the first part one. The recording is week 11, part one is